course, this is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water. Trust me, I'm like a smart person. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius. I had the best words. Tolerated. I know words. Mike Pounds. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation. But there's no better word than stupid. Anonymous, really anonymous. I'm very highly educated. One of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water. I had the best words. God bless the United States.
Around the nation, DYD Nation, Jeff Waldo here, welcome to the show. We got a good show here on this Tuesday afternoon. We'll have some fun. We'll talk about, of course, Donald Trump's total authority. He's got some total authority going on here, and we'll talk about that. And also, I will rarely give credit to CNN, or at least a CNN reporter. I know. Strange times we live in. We've got Obama's endorsement. It's not going to surprise you, but we'll go through it anyway. We'll talk about this and what role Obama has played throughout the primary. That's an explosive New York Times report. And we'll talk about that. Prepare to be infuriated. Then we're going to talk about the role of non-voters. So it was a great piece in The Intercept by Glenn Greenwald, and I want to talk about that because it flies in the face of all the vote blue no matter who people. I know some of you might be vote blue no matter who people. I totally understand that. And you know, a lot of you vote for Biden. That's fine. But the problem is that we have like this notion of people who choose not to vote, who are not going to vote in this election, that may have been, that have been Bernie Sanders supporters. Some of them, where some of them are still non-voters, and we don't talk about those people. And I want to push back on some of the narrative against them. So we'll talk about that. That's very important, and so I look forward to having that conversation. But first, before I do. I have a super chat here from Sarge Tech that asks, why is the flag atop the White House not flying at half staff for the almost 27,000 dead Americans? Could it be that our president doesn't care? Well, look, I think it's an obvious answer to that. No, I don't think he does. I mean, he cares more about re-election, the economy, being liked, all that stuff. We already knew all that. So that's kind of like okay, sure. That's a bit of a layup question, but thank you for supporting the show anyway. All right. So let's, I suppose we should just get started here. All right.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
The authority is total.
The authority of the president of the United States having to do with the subject we're talking about is total.
That was President Donald Trump, of course, declaring that he has total authority to force the states to reopen their economies in the midst of the coronavirus. So now coronavirus, of course, is a pandemic. Um, right now, the United States has the highest amount of cases and the highest amount of deaths that are recorded. So now, look, you can go and say, well, China might be hiding the amounts of deaths that they've had and infections too. That is very possible, but as of right now, known cases and known deaths, the United States leads the world. We're number one. We're number one. And it's because we were unprepared, more so than a lot of the other countries. Even Italy. We were far more unprepared than Italy, which has, of course, had a disastrous time and is still having a disastrous time dealing with the effects of coronavirus. So now, look, right now, we're not only in the middle of a pandemic, but also in the middle of massive economic upheaval. So that's that's where the calls to reopen the economy are coming from. Hey, man, look, we got to reopen the economy. We're going to have massive unemployment. It's going to be disastrous. And look at all these people that are suffering. Okay, totally. I get it, right? The problem is we can't open it up right now because we're continuing to see increases in both coronavirus cases and deaths related to that illness. And so it would be a bad idea to reopen the economy, especially, if every different state treats this differently as it has, right? I mean, our nation's response to this is as good as every state's individual response to the crisis when they decided to do stay-at-home orders and all that. If a state issued a stay-at-home order later than the states around it, then guess what? We as a country, we as a collective nation, we've got to wait longer as a country to begin reopening or risk a second wave of infections. And also applies to the rest of the world. The United States, if we lag behind the other countries in trying to, flatten that curve and basically eradicate the virus by making sure that it can infect new people, and we reopen up and there are no travel restrictions or basically what would be a travel ban, the other countries would have to ban all travel to the United States until we deal with this. And that would, of course, be disastrous for our economy, for trade, and all that stuff. So really, it's down to the people that are, that it's down to what every country does. And, of course, within every country, it's down to whatever state and city does, and to make sure that they stop the spread of this virus. So, it's ridiculous, right? So, and as for Trump's claim, all right, so he claims we've got total authority, right, to shut this down. No, he doesn't. See, there's this thing called the 10th Amendment. There's states' rights, right? And then, of course, you have states' rights and you have the rights of the federal government, right, or the power of the federal government. And that is a system that we live in, and it's called federalism. So in this case, the states do have the power to end the stay-at-home order and reopen local economies. The federal government does not have that power. Now, I'm certain that they can put some pressure on that, on those states to reopen by withdrawing federal funding, et cetera, right? But to say that I have total authority, hey, Michigan, I order you to no longer do the stay-at-home order, that's not going to fly very well because that's beyond their power, okay? In fact, William Busby, a professor of Georgetown University Law School, and an expert in the subject of federalism, said this: state and local governments have strong police power to protect their citizens, and so I'm unaware of any way in which the federal government could basically try to override anything the states and cities have been doing to protect the public health of their citizens. Honestly, there isn't anything that he can do constitutionally. So we do have this document. I know there's a lot of conservatives out there who claim to be fans of the Constitution, that we have to follow this. Well, then you should be like, hey, Donald Trump, what are you doing? That's not your power in the Constitution. It's not your constitutional authority. You can't actually do that. I don't hear a lot of that going on. No, instead I hear a lot of Trump's always right. He's 100% right. Reopen the economy. Do it right now. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the power. Okay, anyway. So now the CDC also says that states have police power functions to protect the health, safety, and welfare of persons within their borders. Isolation and quarantine orders are among those police power functions, which are derived from the right of the state to take action affecting individuals for the benefit of society. So again, not in their power. It's clearly something that Donald Trump cannot do, as he is not a dictator. I know some of you want him to be, but that's not the reality. We live in America. It's America. All right, anyway. So now, he was asked by a reporter, right, what gave him the power to reopen the economy, right? He said, well, numerous provisions. I can give you a legal brief if you want. Legal brief. I'm sorry, but a handwritten note in crayon saying President Trump is awesome, he's the greatest president ever and could do whatever he wants is not a binding government document. And it certainly does not negate the Constitution. No, in this case, the states do have the power, and a lot of states are making the right call to enforce social distancing measures and to enforce their stay-at-home orders until medical experts weigh in and say, okay, we beat this thing. We're in the clear. We're in the clear. And not only that, states are getting together to form their own plans in conjunction with each other instead of working with the federal government. Here you have Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Rhode Island getting together, form a council to figure out when and how to reopen their states. That council will include health experts and economic experts from each of the states. So health experts, that's good. Economic experts, that's also good, to figure out the best time for these states to reopen. So that's positive, right? Now, they said the states will work together to develop a fully integrated regional framework to gradually lift the state's stay-at-home orders while minimizing the risk of increased spread of the virus. The states will use tools including testing, contact tracing, treatment, and social distancing, and rely on the best available scientific, statistical, social, and economic information to evaluate progress. Similarly, the governors of California, Oregon, and Washington State announced an agreement that the region will move towards reopening based on health outcomes. Health outcomes and science, not politics, will guide these decisions, the governors of those states said in an announcement. So that is smart, because right now, we're not getting any sort of leadership in the federal government. Not under Donald Trump. In fact, Trump is trusted least when it comes to dealing with coronavirus. Now, that's not to say the Democrats are trustworthy either. People don't trust Joe Biden. However, they do trust, I don't know why, but they trust Andrew Cuomo, who I guess has been doing a better job than President Trump. But you also have Trump officials. Dr. Fauci is one of the most trustworthy on this issue because he's out there giving factual information. Now, that's not to say that the Trump administration isn't trying, because Trump is forming a, quote, opening our country council. Now, Politico reports that it's devoted to reopening the economy as soon as possible. I wonder what their recommendation is going to be. My guess, it's not going to be based on science. Look, here's the thing. We all want to get back to normal. We do. We want to get back to work. We want to get back out there. I haven't had a coffee from the local Big B or anywhere else from for weeks, right? I miss my freaking coffee. But I know that staying home and abiding by the stay-at-home order is better for me and the community. So I don't get it. And so that if I do have it, I don't spread it around. That's smart. I miss things. I'm going to miss doing things in summer. But again, I'm doing what's best for my health and the health of the community. And that's what we should all be doing. I know having to give up a little bit for a very short time for a better long-term health and economic outcome is so hard for some people to do, but we should get over it, suck it up, and do what's right for the country. We've got to be smart, and we've got to use the facts. And I don't trust the Trump administration to look at the facts because look, and they'll tell you, you ask them, they'll tell you, we don't care about the facts. No, being ignorant of the facts, we're proud of that. We're proud to say that science, whoa, we don't believe in science. No. That's fake news, by the way. And so you shouldn't believe any of that. They are proud to spit in the face of scientific evidence and expert advice. Just look at how long it took Donald Trump to take this thing seriously. And the only thing that got him around to this is the fact that the economy was failing. And so, and the stock market, of course, had taken a gigantic dive over this entire thing. And so, look, he didn't actually do anything until mid-March. And by then, you had thousands of people that had died in this country. And, more were needlessly infected by this. And that's why we have to stay home and why the federal government has to be more proactive in protecting small business. And not only that, but they've got to protect the workers from falling into economic hardship. That one $1,200 check, sure, it's nice, but it's not enough too. A one-time $1,200 check. No, that's not going to help as many people as it should. That needs to be increased. You need to have a $2,000 a month until this ends. A UBI until this is over. Not only that, moratorium on rent, moratorium on mortgages. You need to help both individuals, workers, small businesses, and homeowners. Because right now, normal is a long way off. And we've got to be smart. We've got to be wise if we're going to be able to beat this. Because if not, it's going to keep coming back. It's going to do more economic harm. And it's going to, of course, do massive harm to people's lives, which I think should be the most important thing about all of this. Okay. So we'll be moving on here in just a minute. One more thing here. Another super chat here from Sarge Tech says, feeling generous today, supporting independent media. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right. During Monday's coronavirus press briefing, President Trump made the claim that he had the absolute authority to force states to open up the economies. That did not go over well, as a CNN reporter decided to challenge it.
You said when someone is president of the United States, their authority is total. That is not true. Who
Okay,
told
you know
that?
what we're going to do? We're going to write up papers on this. It's not going to be necessary because the governors need us one way or the other, because ultimately it comes with the federal government. That being said, we're getting along very well with the governors, and I feel very certain that there won't be a problem. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Has any governor agreed that you have the authority to decide when their state
I haven't
opens
asked
back up?
anybody because
But
I
no one
don't.
has
You know why?
agreed.
Because I don't have to. Go ahead, please.
But who told you the president has the total authority?
Enough.
Oh, he obviously did not like that question. Couldn't answer it. Why? Because he doesn't have the authority. By the way, that was CNN's Caitlin Collins. Nice work. So Donald Trump, look, he's wrong. He doesn't actually have the authority. The authority is within the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly gives that authority to the states. And so, no, he's absolutely wrong about that. The guy's acting like he's king of the United States. He's not. I remember when conservatives were really angry about President Obama, right? They called him King Obama because he was making these executive orders. I don't hear that same concern about President Trump when he claims that he has authority over the states, which he clearly does not have. Just saying, where are you? Where are you? Look, he's got no right to open up the state economies. As much as we would all like to get back to normal, it is not likely to happen in the short term. But here's the thing, right? So you actually don't see this a lot in the media. And it's because of access. Let's be honest, the media, even in the time of Donald Trump, still wants to have access to those press briefings. I don't understand why. These press briefings are basically a waste of time. I mean, what are you doing? Donald Trump has basically replaced MAGA rallies with this. Since he can't have MAGA rallies right now, he decides to use press briefings as his own rally. In fact, they even showed at one of the most recent press briefings a pro-Trump movie. I mean, it's ridiculous. But so, look, I do give credit to this reporter, Caitlin Collins, because she did challenge Trump, and she's among some of the other journalists that are starting to actually challenge Trump on this and to question him. Jim Acosta is another one. I'm wondering when he's going to start kicking people out. Interestingly enough, he kicked out One American News, but that's because they weren't doing social distancing, which is kind of ironic. But hey, if he does kick out reporters, I actually think that's fine, because why in the world are they covering these anyway? These briefings are chock full of misinformation as long as Trump's talking. Dr. Fauci, obviously a lot better. But again, he's doing these instead of rallies because he can't do those rallies anymore. So I hope these reporters keep pushing him on the facts, on factual information, and actually give credit to Trump when he does do factual information and when he does something right. It's not about having a press that is one side versus the other. No, it's about having an objective press, not a neutral press, but an objective press that actually pushes back on politicians. And I hope that they do this after Donald Trump. I'm glad that they're doing it with Donald Trump, but I'm afraid that if a Democratic president gets into office, that we're going to be back to having a press that's essentially not, it doesn't challenge our politicians enough on things that they get wrong. Because look, Joe Biden is likely, he's obviously the nominee, presumptive nominee, and could very well become the president of the United States. And Joe Biden doesn't exactly have a history of being honest as well. And so I would hope that these reporters would challenge him on his past. But again, knowing what I know from the Democratic primary, that doesn't seem so likely. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Thank you again, Sarge Tech. I do appreciate that. Very, very generous today. I do appreciate it. So now, now that I'm done crapping on the president, so let's go and crap on the Democratic Party, because apparently I am pretty good at it. So, all right. Former President Barack Obama has officially endorsed his former Vice President, Joe Biden. So now this is immediately following the day that Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign and then gave his endorsement to Joe Biden. Now, this, of course, effectively ends the primary months before the Democratic convention is scheduled to happen. It got moved actually up to August. So look, this is not a surprise, right? So we knew that eventually, I wouldn't say no matter who won the Democratic primary, as you're going to see as we get into the story, but certainly Barack Obama was going to definitely endorse one of the establishment candidates after the primary was over. So now, what is surprising is the lack of reporting on how Obama wasn't just standing above the fray, right? No, he was actually helping Joe Biden become the nominee despite not giving an endorsement early on. So, in fact, the Daily Beast had a story that came out recently, and they reported that from the outset of the former vice president's presidential campaign, Obama had promised to stay out of the primary, right? Uh, in fact, Obama had discouraged Joe Biden from even getting into the primary and said, I'm not going to endorse anyone, right, until the primary is over. Now, Biden said, and again, I'll take all this with a grain of salt, that he asked Obama to not endorse him, right? So that whoever won the nomination would do so on their own merits. Now, I have a bit of a problem with this because, again, I paid attention through this entire primary as I was reporting in this on this, and seeing how the primary actually went, you can't really say that he won on his own merits. Look, until South Carolina, Bernie Sanders was crushing the entire field. The centrist vote was massively split. Biden was running out of money. I remember doing that story. He had no infrastructure in a lot of Super Tuesday states, especially California, no ground game. And so what was he doing? He was floundering is what he was doing. And it looked like his campaign was likely going to die. But then South Carolina comes around and he gets the Clyburn endorsement. And then that allows him to win in South Carolina by a large margin because apparently, and this is something that I underestimated, the Clyburn endorsement carried a lot of weight in South Carolina's electorate. And, that electorate, of course, you have a lot of older, African Americans who are more conservative. And so, again, that endorsement to Joe Biden carried a ton of weight and allowed him to go to victory. All right. And so after that, here you had Super Tuesday coming up. Well, on the day before Super Tuesday, which is we call Bloody Monday, that's where Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, all the other centrist candidates that were left dropped out, coalesced around Biden, and all gave full-throated endorsements. You even had Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, by the way, was beating Joe Biden by double digits. But no, he dropped out, endorsed Joe Biden, and that, of course, led to a massive Super Tuesday boost. You had all this positive media attention. And again, you had all these major endorsements, which actually does, that's actually, more effective than I thought they would ever be. But they were super, super effective. And they helped propel Biden to some massive victories in Super Tuesday. That gave him momentum for him to continue into Florida and the other states, Minnesota. And then, it's the end of Bernie, right? That's what happened. So can you really say Joe Biden did any of that on his own merits? Not at all. Not at all. Again, this was people coalescing behind Joe Biden, who really wasn't even actively campaigning all that much. No, it was the establishment saying, no, we've made our decision. We're going to be with Joe Biden. And that's it. I mean, look, who is really a enthusiastic Biden supporter? I don't see a lot of those around. Look, there were enthusiastic Warren supporters. There were enthusiastic Kamala Harris supporters. Not a lot of enthusiastic Biden supporters. Look, I even think that Hillary Clinton had more enthusiastic supporters than Joe Biden does. Joe Biden was like, I don't know, default, I guess. And so add that enthusiasm gap with Joe Biden's large amount of baggage, including, allegations of sexual assault. Not only that, but acting inappropriately around women. And so I think the only thing that was keeping Joe alive at this point is now everybody feels like they've got to line up behind him because, well, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Donald Trump, of course, right? So the thing about that is that Biden is now struggling in the polls against Donald Trump. Now, nationally, if you just look at the national polls, you'd say, well, what are you talking about? Biden has a very comfortable lead over Joe Biden, which means he'll do very well. But when it comes to battleground states and the electoral college fight, Biden is shaping up already to have the same weaknesses as Hillary Clinton. The New York Times explains, at the moment, a reasonable estimate is that Mr. Biden is performing 4 or 5 points worse among likely voters in the critical states that he is among registered voters nationwide. As a result, he only holds a narrow and tenuous edge in the race for the Electoral College, if he holds one at all. I know, but it must be fake the New York Times, right? Oh, right. Okay. Now they continue. Mr. Biden, despite his reputed appeal to blue collar workers, blue collar Joe, right? Where he goes and he yells at steel workers. Yeah. Has made little to no progress in winning back the white voters without a college degree who supported Barack Obama in 2012 but swung to Mr. Trump in 2016. That's the New York Times. So what we're seeing is a replay of 2016, despite, of course, the field being, the situation, the conditions being completely different than it was in 2016. Now we have a pandemic, and now we have a massive economic recession that could end up being worse than the Great Depression. So, and look, when it comes to responses to the coronavirus, by the way, Biden's response has been lackluster at best. Trump's has been disastrous, and we know that already. But Biden is doing pretty badly. Biden actually lags behind a pair of Democratic governors and 3 of President Trump's public health experts when it comes to trustworthiness on handling of coronavirus. So, I mean, that's according to a new insider poll. So they don't even trust Joe Biden to be a leader on this. So that's disastrous. No, Joe Biden should have came out like Bernie Sanders and did streams every single day, tried to raise, money for coronavirus victims, and actually put out policy discussions, policy positions that will rise to meet the challenges of our new normal. Instead, he did not. That did not happen. Back to Obama, right? So now, Obama, look, him staying neutral until the end of the primary, supposedly neutral, right? Well, that made some Biden people very angry. In fact, one source told the Daily Beast, quote, "Why isn't the president supporting me when I've done so much to, 1, create his achievements and legacy, and 2, just have a sense of friendship," the source said. Summing up what they said are some of the conflicting emotions brought on by Obama's decision to not engage in the primary until its end. Quote, "Why has this endorsement taken so long?" I'll tell you what, it's pure Obama, right? I'm above it all. No drama, Obama. I'm staying out of the fray. I'm just going to watch from afar. That's me. That's who I am. That's Obama, right? Now, that, of course, is not true as well, because in reality, he was a driving force behind Biden becoming the nominee. According to the New York Times, Obama has been considerably more engaged in the campaign's denouement than has been previously revealed. And here it comes. For months, he had kept in close contact with senior party officials in hopes of preventing a repeat of the protracted and nasty 2016 primary race. Now, let me just stop there, right? Because that supposed nasty, prolonged race in 2016 was actually more tame compared to 2008. That primary was far more nasty. And guess what? You had both Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama. Again, that was a disgusting primary where Hillary Clinton had gone full birther and introduced that birther conspiracy, put out that picture of Obama in Muslim garb. You had the 3 a.m. phone call, all that stuff, right? All that stuff. And yet they want to say that this primary was nasty when Bernie Sanders was actually too nice to attack Hillary Clinton and in that primary, and too nice to attack Joe Biden on his mental state, his deteriorating mental faculties, right? Too nice to attack him on the subject of Tara Reid. Too nice to attack him on a lot of different issues. Bernie Sanders left a lot of ammunition on the table that Donald Trump would be more than happy to use and will use. And so, I mean, yeah, nasty, divisive primary. Ridiculous, right? But again, that's the New York Times. It's their perspective, because apparently a lot of people were loud on social media and were typing snake emojis. Wow, so toxic. But there's more. They write, in the weeks after it became clear that Mr. Biden was the party's near certain nominee, Mr. Obama, telling a friend he needed to, quote, accelerate the end game, had at least 4 long conversations with his former vice president's remaining rival, Senator Bernie Sanders. And so, look, the conversations apparently had borne fruit, because you had Bernie Sanders that eventually left the race. In fact, they said Mr. Obama's efforts to ease the senator out of the race played a significant role in his decision to end his bid and on Monday endorse Mr. Biden, according to people close to the Vermont Independent. So I don't know what Obama said, but I do know that there was immense pressure on Bernie Sanders to step down, to get out of the race early. Maybe it's because they said, well, look, you got to get out now. You have no path to victory. And you don't want to see what happened, when you stayed in for as long as you did against Hillary Clinton happen again, right? You don't want to be responsible for Donald Trump. And then maybe we might consider some of your tiny little bit of your policy positions, but not too much. I don't know, but I do know that there had to have been a ton of pressure on Bernie Sanders for him to make this decision to not stay in at least till the convention. And I think coronavirus honestly had something to do with it. Maybe they said, look, we're going to keep doing primary elections then, and we're going to keep, and this is my speculation, we're just going to keep, urging people to go and vote in person and possibly get coronavirus. And then we're going to blame you for it. Look, Bernie Sanders cares about one thing. He cares about humanity, right? He cares about people. And so if it came down to him having to leave the race because, like, okay, I don't want to get people hurt, I don't want to be responsible for this. I don't like, I do want to beat Trump, and I do want to make some sort of progress. And so, okay, fine, I'll do it. I don't know if that's what happened, but I think maybe. I mean, anything's possible. And not only that, but look, you also have Bernie Sanders having a lot of respect for Joe Biden. I do not share that respect for Joe Biden and Barack Obama, not anymore. I voted for the guy twice and was thoroughly disappointed both times. But again, Bernie Sanders I think he's too nice of a guy. And so he did fall to that pressure. And I understand that. Now, going back to Obama, right? Now, Obama had also been criticizing Bernie Sanders behind the scenes during this primary and said, oh, people don't want to burn down the system. No. They want change, but they want incremental change. Well, if you look at exit polls in all the states that had a chance to vote, and you look at the popularity of a policy like Medicare for all, no, a lot of people are like, yes, we should have Medicare for all. We should have a single-payer system. A single-payer system is much, much better than a system that, in times of very, very high unemployment, leaves millions of people without their health insurance. Again, you have over 10 million people, 16 million, I think now, who don't have, jobs, who are on unemployment. And a lot of those people, statistically, about half of all Americans get their insurance through their employer. And now they no longer have that insurance. And so that's unfortunate. And that's exactly why a single payer system would be beneficial for everyone. But okay. Look, he also, Obama had helped Biden with this campaign strategy. And so here's the thing, that's 100% Obama. I'm going to go and say that I'm staying neutral on the outside, but in reality, I'm also working against Bernie Sanders. We're going to be against Bernie Sanders. We're going to protect the establishment. Anybody but Bernie. I'll stay out of it as long as it's not Bernie. And so that's the problem. And again, Obama, we know he's all about the establishment, right? Thing is, in 2008, he actually had the youth vote. He was a fundamental change candidate. And he did so in a way, he campaigned in a way that Biden is going to struggle to do. And Hillary Clinton certainly struggled. And, he actually did get the youth vote, which turns out to be actually really important. Biden has a weakness in that. Nobody under 45, barely any voters under 45, voted for Biden in the primary states. They're now banking on Bernie's endorsement and Obama's endorsement to try to bring out young people, and I don't think it's going to work. No, I think it's it didn't work when Bernie endorsed Clinton. I don't think it will work now. People who followed Bernie, who are in, I don't think they're going to follow him now. They love Bernie. I love Bernie Sanders, but the thing is, it's not about Bernie Sanders. It never was. The thing is that Bernie Sanders, a lot of us leftists believe that Bernie Sanders is, a good person, but he is also an imperfect vehicle for change, for the kinds of policies that we really want to see. It's never been about the person. It's always been about policies. I say that all the time on the show, and it's always been true. And so when Bernie says you should probably just vote for Biden now because it's the best thing, I don't think a lot of people are going to listen. Some are going to make the tactical decision to vote for Biden, and that's fine. And some are going to say, no, electoral politics has failed me. It's failed the country. And so I don't know. I'm just either not going to be involved, or I'm going to vote a socialist alternative, or I'm going to vote, for whatever, or not vote at all, or it's a vote down ticket. There's a bunch of different things they could do. And of course, a lot of people don't mention those Obama Trump voters, right? The people who voted for Obama because he was open change, that voted for Donald Trump, that would have given Bernie Sanders a chance. And now we'll just go back to voting for Trump. And so that's the situation that they're in. They lost those potential Bernie Sanders voters to now the reelection of Donald Trump. Now, that said, if Biden picked up some of Bernie's policies, which have been proven to be the correct policies, because we're now in a pandemic and an economic collapse, he could get some of those Bernie voters. True. But there is a large problem with Biden, and that's trust, right? The reason that people trusted Bernie and will not trust Biden is because Bernie Sanders has a proven record of fighting for those policies. Joe Biden doesn't, and in fact, he has tripled down on vetoing Medicare for all if it ever came to his desk. So that is another problem for Biden, who has a lot of problems already. And so I don't think any of that is going to get fixed with a Bernie endorsement or with the endorsement of Barack Obama. And so other than diehard Democrats and people who, generally still like Obama, I don't necessarily see this helping Biden get the voters that he needs, independent non-voters, to vote in favor of Biden over Trump. And that is a scary thought. Okay. Whoops. I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll come back. We've got a story about non-voters. Interesting study that goes in the face of course, older people calling non-voters and people who are voting alternatives to Joe Biden privileged. So we'll talk about that. All right. We'll be back in a minute. Stay right here. Around the Nation.
Mike Pounds.
Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here. TUT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. Okay, so I want to thank some patrons. Let's go to patreon.com/TUT Nation and thank Judith Ferraris and For the Truth. Then I want to go over to channel memberships and thank Tyler Sutton and Desiroth. We've also got a bunch of super chats. So you guys are amazing. Thank you very much. Especially to Sarge Tech. You're awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you, James. Thank you, Koru. Really, really appreciate that. Weary Pirates, thank you. Kathy Harvey, thank you. Goku Gini, thank you. Again, Jedi Protector. By the way, Jedi Protector says the only reason Trump is doing the updates is because he's bored. And not even calling Fox News can satiate his needs of narcissism. That is very plausible. Thank you. By the way, my condolences again to Sarchek, your brother. Heartfelt condolences, man, to you and your family. A lot of people are losing loved ones, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people who continue to lose loved ones because of this disaster. By the way, Weary Pirates says, still can't believe Dems went with Joe. WTF? I know. It's like they're really good at picking out the worst of the lot. And by the way, all those, not another old white guy, people are eerily silent now with Joe Biden. Weird. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Let's get to the last story here. With Bernie Sanders now out of the race, leaving Biden as the presumptive nominee, centrist Democrats have begun their campaign of vote shaming. If you don't vote for Joe, you support Donald Trump. If you stay home, you're voting for Trump. And if you do that, well, you hate minorities, obviously, and people of color, and on and on. The entire idea, of course, is by, and this is what they put forward, that not voting or voting for an alternative, voting for a Green Party member or a socialist alternative, whatever, is, well, hey man, if you don't take part in this two-party system, which is obviously rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful and the connected, well, then you're showing your privilege, right? You must be a white, wealthy, privileged person to not see the damage that Donald Trump has caused. And by the way, Donald Trump has caused an enormous amount of damage. And that is absolutely true. But is it true that the people who are making these decisions are privileged? That if you go Green Party, or if you go down ballot, or if you stay home, it's because you're wealthy, white, and privileged. That's the truth, right? And are hurting minorities, so you must be some sort of racist, right? And you're throwing a gigantic fit because you're a petulant child. I mean, vote blue no matter who, right? So is that true? Is that characterization, is that narrative actually true? No. It turns out it's not true. And there's data to back that up. It turns out that voters' motivations are very complicated. Now, The Intercept did a great deep dive into this, and they looked at polling. They simply looked at surveys, right? And so they're not pulling this out of their butt, right? They're actually looking at hard data from the 2016 election, from the 2018 midterms, as well as non-voting data specifically, right? So now, in fact, Pew Research did an incredibly comprehensive survey of non-voters, and it was published on August 9th, 2018. And in it, they found that non-voters are more likely not to be wealthy, but to be younger, not as well educated, less affluent, and more non-white. So almost half of non-voters, by the way, in 2016 were minorities, even though they compose about 1/4 of the voting population. Now, minority voters are, of course, considered, especially African-American voters, the backbone of the Democratic Party. And so if you have people that are, African-Americans, and you don't have Latinos that turn out, and Asian Americans who do, in some regards, tend to go more conservative, but you have minorities like African Americans and like Latinos that generally tend to go for Democrats, even though there was I think about 26% of Latino voters did go for Donald Trump. And so that's an interesting demographic shift. But nonetheless, a lot of these non-voters, a lot of them could be Democrats, could vote for Democratic candidates, but they're not. And so that's interesting. And why is that? Well, a lot of it has to do actually with class. More than half of non-voters, 56% of them are actually poor. They make less than $30,000 a year, even though that income group constitutes just over 1/4 of the voting population. So people who are making under $30,000 a year generally just don't vote. Now, perhaps they don't have the means to vote, to be able to take a day off for voting. That's why we need a national voter holiday. That's why we also need to do something about voter suppression. But in reality, voter suppression also accounts for a small fraction of the reason why these people just don't turn out to vote. And so, plainly, the data shows, at least from this one survey, that those who choose to vote are disproportionately more privileged than those who choose not to vote. So that, of course, turns the entire narrative on mainstream media on its head. Now, Washington Post also weighed in on the analysis of this survey. They said that Pew's data shows that almost half of all non-voters were non-white and 2/3 were under age 50. More than half of those who didn't vote earn less than $30,000 a year. More than half of those who did vote were over age 50. And so you have an electorate that's overwhelmingly white, wealthy, or I should say more affluent, and older. And so, of course, that leaves out people of color, generally, the poor, and, younger people who are, of course, more helped, or I should say, more harmed by keeping the status quo. So now the question is, based on this data, shouldn't be how can we better vote shame people into voting for our crappy candidate, and more of how do we get them to actually believe that their vote matters and to get them to turn out? Because there are a lot of people that actually don't believe that their vote matters, that their voice matters, that they're being representative in democracy, and that being a part of the electoral process will help enhance their lives. Now, I don't necessarily believe that, right? I do believe that voting helps. And so I think we should be trying to get more non-voters into the electoral process. But we can't do that by vote shaming people. That doesn't work. So now let's get more opinion here. This is the New York Times data journalist Nate Cohn. So he looked at data from the New York Times Siena College survey of non-voters. Now, these are people in battleground states who abstained from voting in 2016 and 2018. He describes these voters as, quote, disproportionately young, non-white, and low income, adding that non-voters are less likely to have graduated from a four-year college. In a separate article last July, Cohn also noted that young and non-white low-income voters are overrepresented among non-voters, and young and non-white voters continue to vote at lower rates than older and white voters. That was not only true for 2016, but also true in 2018 as well, the midterms. So that data right there is disastrous. So now I mentioned one of the reasons that people, I think, fail to turn out. They don't think their voice matters. They don't think their vote matters, right? And that's backed up by another study in Pew taken in 2017. They found that the unregistered were more likely to say that they do not vote because they dislike politics or believe voting will not make a difference in their lives, while people who are registered but vote infrequently say they do not vote more often because they're not informed enough about the candidate or issues. Well, look, that last part, that would actually be solved if the media were to talk about issues and less about the horse race. So on this show, we do like to talk about issues. We do like to talk about policy because I believe policy matters the most. You turn on CNN and MSNBC, they don't talk about policy. They only talk about horse race. And as of late, the last few years, all they talk about is we got to beat Trump and look at how bad Bernie is. So the media is, I think, at fault for a lot of that. So now what you have is a situation where there are so many people that are disenchanted by the electoral process as it is. And look, after seeing two primaries that are weighted against insurgent candidates who do not follow the party line exactly, it's kind of tough to make a counter argument against that. After seeing what we've seen, after experience what we've experienced, the last two elections, the primary elections of Bernie Sanders. But again, going back to the narrative, right? That, oh no, the people who sit out and the people who are deciding not to vote, well, they're privileged, right? And it must be. It must be because they're privileged and they're not going to be affected by this. No, they are affected by this. It's a complete opposite. These people are desperate, but they don't believe that the two-party system offers an alternative to them. And so they've decided not to involve themselves with that two-party system. They say that they'll never get change out of electoral politics. I mean, the Huffington Post had another article that explained about the 2018 midterm elections, right? They said that as a group, non-voters also tend to be generally disengaged from public affairs and cynical about the government and their own roles in civic life. Nearly half of all non-voters in the most recent election said their personal dislike of politics played at least a minor role in their decision not to vote. And what doesn't help is that non-voters are rarely discussed in the mainstream, except, of course, derisively, right? The media in Washington, they really have no interest in courting non-voters. In reality, the Democratic Party is very, very interested in trying to poach voters from Republicans, suburban voters. So, and these are, again, suburban Republican voters, instead of reaching out to these disaffected communities and saying, no, we do have policies that will help you. But in order to do that, they actually do have to represent those policies. And so that gets, of course, to the uncomfortable conversation. Another reason why media doesn't want to talk about it, because they'd have to talk about the systemic inequities in the system. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation for pundits who are paid millions of dollars to be on the air. It's easier to try and vote shame people, to be a James Carville, right? Instead of coming up with a way to get them to vote in larger numbers. Now, one more thing here. Mostly cable pundits go out and do this ridiculous thing like, oh, vote shaming, whatever. The New York Times actually did a pretty decent piece on this. They actually surveyed African Americans, and it wasn't an opinion piece. It was just purely a factual piece. And they talked to African American voters in Milwaukee. Now, these are voters that didn't vote in the 2016 election, right? And their vote, of course, was consequential, or I should say their non-vote was consequential, as President Trump won that state and ended up winning the Electoral College. Now, of the city's 15 council districts, they saw a decline in turnout for Hillary Clinton. That turnout had declined from 2012 to 2016 in the 5 poorest areas and was much greater than the drop seen in more prosperous areas. And so in the poorest areas of the city, you had less turnout. And look, the prosperous areas, the more wealthy areas, they also saw a little bit less turnout. But you still had more people that did turn out to vote. And those, of course, more affluent people tend to be more engaged, according to these studies. So now, the turnout or lack of turnout from these poor minority areas, that actually accounted for about half of the overall decline in turnout citywide. So now these non-voters, by the way, they were asked by the New York Times, okay, look, you didn't show up, and that's why Donald Trump won. Do you feel bad about it at all? And they said, no, I don't feel bad at all. No. In fact, the reasons they stated is because they don't believe that the outcome of elections improves their lives. And they don't believe that a victory by the Democratic Party would be meaningful for them at all. One Milwaukee barber, Cedric Fleming, said this in a quote, "I don't feel bad. Milwaukee is tired. Both of them, Clinton and Trump, were terrible. They never do anything for us anyway." Another Milwaukee barber, again, not a wealthy person, not a white person, said this, "I'm so numb," said John Toney, 45, who had written in Mr. Sanders. He said, "No president in his lifetime has ever done anything to improve the lives of black people, including Mr. Obama, whom he voted for twice. Quote, it's like I should have known this would happen. We're worse off than before." So these are not your rich, white, privileged leftists. And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand, is that you have a lot of non-voters that are desperate, right? They are poor. They are minorities. They are people that the economic system under the status quo has left behind. And so while it seems to be counterintuitive, like, no, if you want to change it, you get out there and vote. But then when you see the choices that you have now Joe Biden and Donald Trump, a lot of people will look at that and go, that doesn't seem like a choice at all. Now, to counter that, I always say vote in primaries, because I think primaries are super important. But I can look at that position with a certain amount of understanding and think, Yeah, I get it. I don't agree with it, but yeah, I get it. I get it. And so that's unfortunately something, an understanding that does not get expressed by, I think, some of the most hyper partisan people, people that generally are more wealthy and privileged and tend to be so, be very dismissive of non voters and Sanders people, especially on social media. And so basically, the entire narrative about them is not backed up by factual data. And so my takeaway from this is, okay, so now what do we do to get people motivated to turn out, to actually get these non-voters turn out that don't have any trust in the system? I'm not sure, but there's a little bit of insight from, again, Nate Cohn, who explained this, that the candidates most closely associated with the status quo are the ones most likely to drive voters away from the polls, while those who appear to be outsiders who intend to deviate from bipartisan consensus are the most likely to motivate them. That's why, of course, Bernie Sanders in 2019 actually had the greatest appeal among non-voters when he was perceived as something other than a traditional Democrat. That's why people are calling for an outsider candidate. That's why people are calling for a Green Party candidate. That's why people are calling for an outside party, because there are people that are tired of Democrats versus Republicans. And again, looking at the data, I kind of understand where they're coming from. When you don't present yourself as a traditional politician, and this was true for Trump. Trump also presented himself as not your average politician. And actually, in reality, he is like your average politician, but with one major difference. He's actually honest about the reason that he wants to be there: to make money. He's far more honest in his actions than his words. And his actions are to enrich himself as much as possible. That is just like almost every other politician out there right now. How does this help me? How does this help my power? How does this help my money? And that's really what it's about. And so when it comes to the candidates, Cohn continues, Mr. Sanders showed relative strength among non-voters. He was at 41%, very favorable rating in the group, compared to with 33% for Mr. Biden, a noticeable drop, and only 30% from Ms. Warren. Sanders could have brought out more non-voters in the general election, whereas Joe Biden is going to have a very difficult time bringing out those voters he needs to win. And I'm talking about younger voters as well. You look at Biden's enthusiasm, he's got a major enthusiasm gap. Very few people are enthusiastic about his candidacy. And so there are more people that are enthusiastic about Donald Trump and his candidacy than is Joe Biden. And so he's going to have a very, very difficult time. He's not going to bring out those disaffected voters. The point is, many of Sanders' supporters that are threatening to sit out, again, are neither wealthy, white, or privileged, like they're being painted by the media, and generally do believe that Bernie Sanders, though imperfect, was the only true vehicle for at least some sort of systemic positive change in a system that's generally left them behind. And with Bernie Sanders out of the race and him endorsing Joe Biden, it's not going to be a surprise to see these people who generally are non-voters go back to not voting, that Dem exit. Because remember, there had to have been a Dem enter, and you had a lot of people who thought, okay, Bernie Sanders is running in this election. I'm going to enter the Democratic Party, and I'm going to support him, and I'm going to vote for him. With no Bernie Sanders, those people will slide right back out, and they lose a lot. The Democrats lose a lot of potential voters. That's not only a loss for Joe Biden, obviously, and the Democratic Party, but the country as a whole, if we were ever going to have hope of defeating Donald Trump. So that is disastrous, a very disastrous story. But that's all I got. That's all the time I have. All right. So, all right. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to thank you all for watching. Please like and share the stream if you haven't already. Very important that you do so. Thank you again for all the super chats. You're amazing. That helps the show. It helps us continue. Patreon.com as well. Patreon.com/TYTNation. Or become a channel member to help as well. So thank you guys. Love you. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you guys later on. Please be safe.
Please clap.
Wait, oh, you're getting nervous, man.
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
Tolerize it.
You're kicking me out the door. You're kicking me out the door.